Hello, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the first official episode of the Trident Therapy podcast. I'm Jalen, and I'm with,
Nick.
yeah, and we're uploading this before the first game on Friday, and let's recap the first half kind of. So, first, the Manners currently sit at 48 and 49. One game under 500, and they are 1.5 games back of the West. And despite how shitty it seems or how bad everything looks, we are somehow in the playoffs and we're the third wild card team. And the team has been disappointing. We had one All-Star, though Dominic Canzone should have been an All-Star. Bryce Miller should have been an All-Star. But we didn't have the record to warrant multiple All-Stars, despite the Tigers somehow having like four All-Stars. But Cole Young also should have been an All-Star. Uh, Nick, you have any thoughts on Cole Young's season so far?
I think just definitely just watching him live and watching highlights, I think he's definitely improved. And I think the thing we always worried about with last year as being his first real year in the majors, I think the biggest thing was just like kind of how it is with a lot of Mariners players, especially prospects. I think the biggest thing is like getting on base and then how can they be a quality defender while also making sure they have meaningful contributions to the offense. And I think this year he's just taken a huge step forward in both. Honestly, there's some plays where he does seem like a Gold Glove at defense, and then obviously there are still things that he can do better in terms of batting and stuff like that. But we can see the improvement already, and I think you really give him that time. You really make sure he gets his at bats in, and then you're looking at a start player next year. You should have been one this year, and I can definitely say you're looking at one next year if he continues that trajectory. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely, I would say he's a clear favorite for the second base Gold Glove in the AL right now. And his his slugging and OPS aren't like the best. He's only OPSing 707, but he's really come through and surprisingly he's been able to hit lefties and he has so many plate appearances with RBI situations and he's been probably our second best in them other than Randy. And that's pretty much the only bright spots. It's Cole Young, it's Randy, and it's Dominic Canzone, and it took Dan Wilson and the Mariners 88 games to figure out that Kenzone can hit lefties, even though there's a clear sample size of him hitting lefties last year. And the pitching staff it's been on and off, but particularly Wu, Gilbert, Kirby, but Gilbert has had a nice run of, I would say, 7, 8 starts recently, and his velocity has increased, which is a noticeable change. And uh, I think he played himself out of trade talks, and I think he might have played himself back into extension talks. And do you have any thoughts on the pitching so far,
Yeah.
Nick?
I think yeah, just definitely like we know this for the last couple of years, Mariners have, I would say, what is a top five rotation in the entire league. Actually might be top two in the AL. And that's what's kept them alive in a lot of these games this year. We see like the whole joke and meme about it. If like you have pitching, then you don't have run support, and if you have run support, you don't have pitching. And there's all this like kind of jokes about it, but we actually see that mostly to be true. I feel, and that's like the problem, like I just mentioned, when the offense is only averaging around 4 runs a game, which is the third worst metric in baseball. It feels like the pitching staff is just being wasted and they have no margin for error. So, like, you do have elite players. You have Brian Wu, you have Bryce Miller, who's having one of his best seasons as a Mariner, but you do not allow them any room to breathe. And that are going to make mistakes. You put these pitchers in stakes and pressure that they don't need to be in. There's going to be unwarranted mistakes that happen naturally because of that. And we can take a look and we can say like, hey, maybe the player's having a bad season, but at the end of the day, we know it has to do with batting and managing and making sure we're getting the most of our pitchers, but we're not making them burn out in the process.
Yeah, I think you're definitely right that the pitching has like anchored us, and we should not waste the pitching staff that we have this year. I mean, 2025 it was injuries and we did not fully capitalize at the deadline, and 2024 it was a huge waste. We had Gilbert who had like a very low free ERA. We had Miller sub free ERA, and we had with like 20, 15, 20 starts of like the Brian Wu that we saw last year, maybe not this year. And this year it's kind of looking like the same thing. Miller is pitching like a Cy Young right now. He just doesn't have the innings. If he has the innings, he's probably a front runner for the Cy Young, the way he's looking. Hancock, you could have argued, also should have had some all-star consideration. And I think every single pitcher on the Mariners staff, except for Hancock and Miller, they have all been all-stars. And you add a high leverage bullpen, you have Munoz, Bazardo, Spire, Jose Freire, Matt Brash. That's five legit high leverage relievers. And in September, it sounds like we're gonna get Ryan Sloan and Kate Anderson in the bullpen. So that leaves you room for one high leverage reliever, and you have all the prospects to go ahead and acquire one.
I guess
And yeah.
I'll kind of, as we like segue into the next topic, to kind of round out as we lead into the second half of the season. What grade would you give the Mariners for the first half?
Um, I'm gonna be I would give them an F, but given the injuries and given that Dan Wilson is their manager, I would go like I would go D plus to C minus just because even though they're underperforming by a wide margin, I would feel like they are in a comfortable spot because they are only 1.5 back of the West. They're in a wild card position, and they have all the prospects to go and get that everyday bat they need or that high leverage reliever they need. And it's just the only thing wrong with the Mariners is they're not performing, other than Dan Wilson. But yeah, what grade would you give us?
Yeah, I just have to agree. I think that's a perfect range. I think C to C minus, even a D plus would be kind of the range. I think injuries are a big factor. I know Brendan Donovan was playing very well for us for that first month of the season, and then this injury thing has just like kind of plagued him for a while now. Happy to see that he's making rehab starts now. He's gonna have to ramp up soon as we get later in the season. But yeah, managing's been probably at its worst since Dan Wilson got here as manager, and I think just like they're it's not like they're playing way worse. They're like the outcomes are way worse than they're playing, because like we know they're 48 and 49, but the expected win is only 50 and 47, so that's only two games. So it's really just about like using the resources, riding that momentum from last year. I think I stressed this a lot, like with you had an ALCS appearance and then you pushed that team to game 7. So you were right there on the cusp of being in a World Series for the first ever time. And I don't want that to go to waste. I think we kind of see that happen in 2022 when we went to the playoffs for the first time in 20 years. And then we kind of like were in that down period for a couple of years and then back after a couple of years last year. And I think we, in order to capitalize, like Jalen mentioned, this is a weak AL West. We're only 1.5 games behind in the division. I think it's very important to get that managing act together, get everything we're wrong with this team together before it gets too late, because I think oftentimes we kind of adjust for these issues, but we're in the middle of September, and what use does that do us now? So yeah, I definitely have to say probably around a C, C minus, D plus grade.
Yeah, and kind of like to build off, like yeah, AL and the West in general is it's really weak. But if you look at a fully healthy roster, it's Brendan Donovan leading off, former All-Star. It's Julio. We know in the second half he performs like an MVP player. It's Randy who's been one of the most consistent players in the past half decade, and it's Kenzone who's played like a top 10 right fielder slash DH in the past. I would say year and a half. And we have Cole Young, who Gold Glove second baseman who can deliver. We have five everyday bats. We have Josh Naylor. I don't remember if he's been an all-star yet, but he's historically been very consistent player in terms of average and power, and we just haven't gotten that this season. Just like from Cal Raleigh, we haven't gotten anything from Raleigh this season. And that's seven players deep. And I haven't even mentioned JP Crawford yet, who's been as good as a non-all-star could get. He's always top 10 in walks and on base, and he's always clutch. He seems to always deliver in bases loaded and late inning situations. We have an eight-man deep lineup, and we have kind of all the prospects to trade for that. I would say we're missing that one bat right now. And preferably they have to be right-handed because God knows we can't hit lefties. But yeah. And second half expectations, we have 3 weeks left until the deadline. So that's 3 weeks to prove to the front office that we are worth investing into at the deadline. That's 3 weeks for Colt Emerson to prove that he is that missing bat. And if he is, then we don't need to trade for a guy, but we still should anyways. And it's it's very important that we capitalize on our prospects and on the weak AL because last year it was a pretty weak AL too, and we didn't fully capitalize that. And then this offseason, we actually capitalized that. We got Donovan, we signed Ref Snyder, who's supposed to be good, and we traded for Jose Ferrer. And it's now can we build on the past offseason and get and go all in this trade deadline. And I think we're looking at a really good roster, and it's just can these players perform? And that's really the question. It's not about is this team good enough? It's just can you get back to just the normal level of play that your guys have consistently shown.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess second half expectations. I'm gonna. This is obviously there's not a ton of metrics to like there's not going to be, but I'm gonna go ahead and say there's 65 games left in the season, and I'm gonna say if we want to win the division, want to repeat champs, I think the Mariners have to win roughly 40 out of those 65 games to win the division, maybe even get a not a bye this year because the Yankees and Rays will. I mean, the second seed, who knows? The AL is still pretty weak, but win your division, bring that home crowd back. We know how Seattle playoff sports are in general. Bring your crowd back, make them support you as a team. And yeah, I think like Jalen mentioned, Julio getting hot is a big thing, but we can't rely on him every year because we don't know what's going to happen. We trust that it will, but needs to be other things in this team, of course.
Yeah, and you actually brought up a good point that I didn't even think of. We need to go like 40 and 20, and that's a pretty like substantial like pace that it doesn't seem very likely for this team. That's like a unintended, that's like a 67 win percentage, right?
Yeah.
And that's like, and we could get the second seed. As I'm looking right now, the White Sox are 50 and 45 in the Central, and the Mariners are 48 and 49 to the free games. I think they have the tiebreaker, same with the Guardians. So we're like 4 games back of the bye. I think that's still a reasonable place to get, and that's what we should be aiming for. And I think the schedule looks really hard in August. So we have the Rays, the Yankees, the Astros, the Brewers, the Cubs, and the Phillies in August. That's going to be a huge challenge for the Mariners. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it definitely is a gauntlet then, but I trust in this team at least to scrape out some gritty wins against the Astros. I look at a team like them. The Rays, Yankees, always tough. Yankees always give us a hard time. Rays, we've seen what they've done to us this season, but I'm confident against what we can do against those other teams in the NL and stuff like that. And yeah, I guess we got to see. Let's see what happens in at the end of July. We obviously don't got too much time left before those that stretch begins. But I think these next 2 weeks will determine a lot about how we feel going to that series. Those
Yeah.
series, yeah.
And I guess we're gonna the biggest like I feel like it doesn't matter like how we perform, and I feel like even though that teams can win with a bad manager, I feel like the ultimate thing weighing this team down will be Dan Wilson managing the Mariners. And do you have any thoughts on that before I go on my tangent?
Oh yeah, let's talk some Dan Wilson. Uh, so I think we all have some sort of animosity towards Dan Wilson, and it's gonna naturally happen when your team's underperforming, regardless of how the manager is actually doing. But I think there's been many times this season where I've just like looked at a decision, but and I think the biggest thing is his bullpen management. I think it's absolutely atrocious sometimes. Where like I think last week there was a game where Munoz had pitched 9 pitches, and I know it's
Yeah.
customary for him to only pitch 1 inning usually, but he had only pitched 9 pitches, and then he put in a reliever that was not ready at all, and then the game was blown. And I think it's it may seem like it's just like it may seem like placebo, but I feel like that effect has happened multiple times this year where we lost a game because of a decision Dan Wilson made or did couldn't make. I know there was that game against the Padres where the Mariners were up like 5-1 in the ninth inning, and then they lost that game because Dan Wilson refused to take Andres Munoz out. And like clearly everyone knew like he was not gonna hold up for that inning, but we pitched it out, and then look what happened. So I've already named 2 games that could have been flipped, and it's like there's probably many more that could have happened. And I think we've seen his like inability to sometimes control a team. I think last year we saw this most evidently with obviously using Bizardo like repeatedly during the playoffs and putting him against Springer when you had many bullpen arms that were fresh and ready to go. Like that, maybe even letting Kirby stay out against Kerry Carpenter twice in that series, and I think we even like we did, and then the one thing I will say though is kind of rambling on, but the one thing I will say is like he did put Spire in for one of those, and Kerry Carpenter still hit a home run. But at that point, that's the player. We're not going to put that on Dan Wilson, but he needs to be more progressive in terms of making his choices on the field and in the dugout. I feel like sometimes he's very conservative. He doesn't want to change too much of the game dynamically, and I think that's what hurts this team ultimately. And I know it's like it's not necessarily a fact or not, but I think that does also affect like player chemistry, player morale, because these guys are can play at an elite level, but they're never given the opportunity, or they're not given the opportunity to properly perform there. That's what happens. So I think the final roundup would be for Dan Wilson would be like, don't fire him now, but the games where we blow leads or it was silly errors or like bullpen decisions, like those need to immediately stop as we get into the second half of the season.
Yeah, I feel like that Blue Jay series was like really confusing because like we used Bizardo in the games 3 and 4 when there was blowouts, and we also use him in like games 1 or 2. And it's like it doesn't make sense, especially in the playoff. If a game's gonna be out of hand, why would you use your high leverage relievers? Because I mean, logically, it's the same batters and the same pitchers, and that's what makes the playoffs so hard for both sides. It's you're seeing the same guys, the same pitching angles over and over again. It's like, why would you give George Springer another chance to see that same angle too? And it's just the managing from Dan Wilson. He's too lenient on players, and he's too like I'll say he's too patient, which I know that might sound like a good thing, but it's like it took him so long to get Rowley out of the two hole. Like you can't have a black hole at your two hole for that long. It took him way too long to move Canzone up, way too long to move Naylor down. And it's just like he leaves guys in when he shouldn't, and he sometimes puts guys in when they should be taken out. Like I think Brian Wu start against the Angels. Brian Wu pitched 6 scoreless innings. He has that 32 inning, I think it's 32, like scoreless inning streak. Your team just scored like 5 runs in 1 inning. He just sat for 30 minutes. He already went 6. There's no need to push him for a seventh inning, and then you push him for a seventh inning. he walks a guy, I would just take him out at that point. But you let him build on more base runners, and then you just messed up his streak. And then you have like a week later, you have Logan Gilbert chasing a career milestone, 1,000 strikeouts. He's two away. He's at like 88, 90 pitches. He can go 8 innings. He can go one more inning and get those two strikeouts. And it's like I remember this specifically because I met the Marine Lair podcast guys at one of the first games of the season against the Guardians. And he also did this like 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago when the Guardians played, or we played the Guardians, and it's Stephen Kwan leading off, and it's Chase DeLauder batting behind him. And you're leaving the righty in to face Stephen Kwan, and then Stephen Kwan gets like a hit. And then you bring in a guy against Chase DeLauder when it's no, you just bring in Spire earlier and get him against the lefty, right? Or you bring in Josh Simpson or a lefty and get Stephen Kwan. You don't want to face the Lauder. You want to face Stephen Kwan with a lefty. And Mike, that Guardians game, let's see, I was thinking 3 weeks ago, right? We all know that we blew like a 5-run lead. We had Michael Rucker, we had uh Josh Simpson, and we had Munoz too. It's like Nick Davila has performed for you. He literally got you a save. He should be pitching that. It's just Dan Wilson doesn't know like what buttons to press, and it seems like he's managing like a old head. Like Andres Munoz is our designated closer, or Gabe Spire is our designated eighth inning guy. Jose Fers or the it's like you shouldn't have like inning roles. You should just have matchups. Like Spire's gonna come in X scenario to face these lefties, right? And Munoz is gonna come in. If it's the eighth or seventh, he's gonna come in and face the top of the order because your best pitcher should be facing the other team's best hitters. I don't think it's that hard. And we know that Dan Wilson doesn't make the best baseball decisions, right? But they sold us on his like managing like criteria or quality as a patient guy that's a locker room guy, and his main quality is a morale or locker room guy, right? Vibes guy. Well, the vibes seem dead. He's not doing his job. It seems like the locker room is lost. There's no effort. There's no passion. Really, it seems like the team's dead and out of it. And at that point, when it seems like you're losing the team as a manager or the team just seems dead, you're not doing your job. If Especially when you can't make the baseball decisions. And because Dan Wilson isn't doing what he was hired to primarily be as that like locker room team morale guy, he should be fired like as of tomorrow because it's not cutting it. And you are trying to win a World Series. You're just not taking advantage of the like easy AL that you have.
Yeah, that's also suitable. Yeah, definitely agree with a lot of the things said there. Yeah.
Trade talks. So, do you have any like players from the Mariners you think should be traded, or any like targets that you think the Mariners should trade for?
I guess I'll go with the obvious one. I think we all know Luis Castillo's time as a Mariner is probably up. If there was a player to be traded away from the Mariners, it would probably be him. I think we've seen the age be a thing for the last couple of years now, and then I thought there was like one start I think he had this year and he looked good. And I was like, maybe we're all right. Maybe we can hold this out for a year. And then it's just kind of gone back to that mean what it was last year. Maybe probably even worse. So I would say Luis Castillo. I think there are teams that still would need a pitcher like him, but it definitely depends on the type of haul you're looking for. If you're looking for a bat, if you're looking for another relief arm, I definitely would package him with probably maybe a prospect or something like that in a deal.
Yeah, I would think that out of the six starters, he is the one to go just because he's the worst one and he has the least amount of club control with the biggest contract. In terms of like teams, I would say like the Cubs have been linked with him for the past two off seasons, and they need a starting pitcher right now. I would say you are right that we would need to attach a prospect for a team to take the contract. I would think the Cubs and Seiya Suzuki would be a good fit. Seiya Suzuki, right-handed hitting outfielder. He can slot in into the top of our lineup, and I feel like that would balance our team out pretty well. And I wouldn't even, and we could trade. I would say another player we could trade would be Luke Rayleigh. I just feel like if you are, the team needs a right-handed bat that it's an everyday bat, and Kenzone has been performing phenomenal. You have Robles, a great bench outfielder. I would say Rayleigh doesn't really have a fit to play, especially when Donovan comes back. And we are looking at Rayleigh, who is on a very cold streak right now. And I think 2 to 3 years of club control left, you could definitely get a solid reliever out of him if you attach that with a prospect too. And I obviously the George Kirby and Logan Gilbert trade talks have been like prominent this season with their contracts getting expiring. And do you think that we should trade one of them? And if we do trade one of them, which one do you prefer we would trade, Nick?
Between Gilbert and Kirby.
Yeah.
Yeah. Dang, that's a hard question. I think I'd have to actually say Logan Gilbert. I think I've seen them both pitch, and I think the one thing, the critique with Logan Gilbert is that like he starts strong and like he pitches well, but he tends to taper off very heavily as he reaches the high end of his pitching count. I think we've seen times where he'll pitch like and have like a 1 ERA on the day, and then he'll pitch that like last inning, and he'll allow two people on base, and it's like he did such a good job, and like it leaves everyone's mind that like but the last thing you did is leave two people on base, and then your reliever comes in unprepared, and they allow a home run, and so suddenly the game is three runs closer. And I think obviously that's something that happens to pitchers all the time, and that's not like a characteristic necessarily unique to Logan Gilbert, but I think I've seen it multiple times, and I think seen even people talk about this where like he's never going to be that guy that can like hold you out for 8 innings and pitch like quality innings for all those eight. I think his taper is a huge one, and I think that has to do with managing. Maybe take him out a bit earlier or something like that, or use him in a trade and get a piece that you would need. You do lose a quality pitcher. I think Logan Gilbert is still a very good pitcher when you use him properly, but I think I've seen that issue arise multiple times. So I'd say yeah, Logan Gilbert over Josh Kirby in a trade.
Yeah, I mean, I would say Kirby definitely gets you more in terms of value, but I would say like you do lose a playoff performer in Kirby. He's been trusted to pitch every elimination game that we've had. Game 3 ALDS in 2022, Game 5 ALDS this past season, and Game 7 ALCS. I would say because of his command, he's just the most trusted pitcher, and I feel like he has that edge around him. And he does have an extra year of club control over Gilbert. And with Gilbert, he does have he's a free agent after next season, and I would say if you do not sign him on a contract or an extension, you would look to trade him. But with the salary cap and the CBA negotiations for the 27 season, you don't know how much of the season that's going to get cut out. So you don't want to lose value in Gilbert, especially if he walks. And I would say that um the past 8 starts, he has seemed to increase his value. I would say we are deep enough and we should capitalize on the everyday bat and possibly also the reliever in that same package we could get for Gilbert. And yeah, especially with Sloan and Anderson up, I feel like it's inevitable that one of these pitchers are going to get probably two of these pitchers actually are going to be traded in the deadline or off season.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah,
Yeah.
especially if this team does make a playoff run, we would definitely see Ryan Sloan or Kate Anderson later on in the season. Yeah.
And we've talked about Castillo, Kirby, and Gilbert. I also think a sneaky name to watch out whether we are sellers or buyers, is Emerson Hancock. I would say that we probably expected nothing out of him this season, and we probably didn't expect much. He probably had no value at all entering this season, but he's a middle rotation starter with the potential to be more even. We know that he's a top prospect in all of baseball at one point. He's only like in his mid 20s. I would say he has 4 years of club control. He could net a lot of value, especially for someone that you didn't plan on being in your rotation. You and he's probably at an innings limit too this towards the second half of the season. So I would say you can net some good value from Hancock, and it would just be a premium, I would say, premium trade.
Yep, exactly. Okay.
Yeah, and we got one last thing I want to talk about is Colt Emerson. I think I mentioned this, I hinted at this during today, but there are 3 weeks until the trade deadline, and Colt Emerson hasn't proven to be an everyday player. And the past faults of the Seattle Mariners were in 23 and 24, we waited for guys to turn things around, like France, Gino, JP in 24, right? And as we know, that just hasn't worked out, especially hitting at T-Mobile Park. And you can't wait for guys to turn it around. I would say give Cole Emerson 3 more weeks, and if he's not if he doesn't turn things around, I would say send him down and look to maybe Donovan's back by then, move him to third, move JP back to short, and look to acquire an everyday bat to fill Emerson's playing time. I'll say that Manners should definitely be ready to do that. And Nick, do you have any closing thoughts on today?
I guess optimistic as usual. I'm just excited to see what this team does. Gonna pay a bit more attention to this team, kind of like I did at the beginning of the season. It was a dry spell where I was kind of out of it, but excited to be back into it. Kind of look at it with a different outlook. See what this team can do. I'll tell you this though, Judd. I think it's gonna be really hard to believe in this team if they come back this weekend and just like completely don't show out at all. And like it's just been the same like the Ray series, like it was. If it's the same way, I think it's gonna be really hard to like even motivate myself to believe in this team. And so I guess the one thing I'll say as like the final remark is like start strong. You have room to lose a few games, but start strong, set that tone immediately, and see what you can do from there.
Yeah, and I just realized the Mariners are probably even. I would say that if we lose, let's say we get swept this Giant series, I would say, okay, now it's the time to fire Dan Wilson, right? But the 50th anniversary celebrations are coming up in like August, so I would say the Mariners are definitely not going to fire Dan Wilson. But
Yeah, we'll
I
see.
think we are talented enough and deep enough where Dan Wilson is a mitigated factor. I would say in baseball you can win with a bad manager. So we'll see how that goes. It's just sum everything up. The team just needs to perform and get healthy. There's no black holes. It's just we just need to perform, and we're only doing that half the games, and it's that we have bullpen, we have starting pitching, but we don't have hitting. We have hitting, we have starting pitching, but we don't have the bullpen. It's that meme. You can't get all three. You can only get all two. But that will be it for today, and I'll let Nick close it out.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you everyone for watching the first episode, first of many, many episodes to come over the next few seasons, playoffs, all of that off season. Yeah. Thank you everyone for watching, and we'll see you all in the next episode.